The first light of Lagos morning touched the white mansion in Ikoyi like a slow blessing. Palm fronds swayed gently against the cream-colored walls, the sound of sprinklers ticking across the garden like tiny clocks. Inside, the marble floors glistened, polished so bright that they caught the golden sun and sent it spilling into corners where shadows used to sleep. The house was alive with a quiet rhythm, kitchen staff murmuring, the smell of sweet tea drifting through the air, and somewhere, far in the background, the hum of the city beginning its restless day. Sophia had already been awake for hours. She always rose before the mansion did. It was her way of staying ahead of the world, of keeping the silence long enough to gather herself before the noise began. Dressed in her simple maid's uniform, she moved like water, smooth, careful, leaving no trace but order behind her. Mop, rinse, fold. She pressed the curtains into perfect lines, wiped fingerprints from glass, and checked that every flower on the piano table leaned gracefully toward the light. She had the kind of presence that seemed invisible at first glance, yet the moment she stopped, the house would feel it. Her habits were not just about work, they were about survival. Sophia knew what it was to live without walls, without peace, without even a bed to call her own. Orphaned too young, she had seen the streets of Lagos at their harshest. She had slept on wooden benches, eaten from kind neighbors when kindness was rare, and worked jobs so small they left no memory except tired hands. Those days had carved her into someone who paid attention, someone who found safety in details. Where others saw a smudge, she saw a problem solved before it became shame. Where others walked past carelessly, she stayed behind, arranging, fixing, protecting. It was this diligence that made Madame Margaret notice her. Margaret weighing as not just a wealthy woman, she was a name, a force, the CEO of Nigeria's most powerful fabric company. Her designs wrapped mannequins from Yaba markets to luxury stores on Victoria Island. She lived in lace and silk, but behind her glasses, her eyes carried the weight of years of work. She was strict, yet fair, and she treated Sophia not as background, but as someone who mattered. When Sophia polished the banister with extra care, Margaret noticed. When Sophia brought her tea without being asked, Margaret's lips curved into a small thank you. And sometimes, after long nights of meetings, she would sit with Sophia in the study, drinking tea side by side, talking about rain and books and roses. In those moments, Sophia felt less like a maid and more like a person again. But in the mansion, not every presence was gentle. Jacob Nelson, Margaret's husband, moved differently. He had the tall build of someone who wanted to be noticed, and the polished charm of a man who smiled for cameras more than for people. In public, he played the devoted partner, laughing loudly at Margaret's side, shaking hands with business partners, and kissing her cheek for the flash of photographers. But in private, Sophia saw the other side, the careless side. He tossed his shoes in the middle of the living room, left his half-finished drinks on marble tables, and snapped his fingers at her as though she were not human, but an extension of the furniture. Sophia never answered back. She lowered her eyes, picked up after him, and remained quiet. Yet her quietness was not ignorance, it was memory. She remembered every detail, every time his gaze rolled with impatience when Margaret took a late-night call, every sigh that carried resentment instead of love, every moment his smile slipped into something sharp when no one else was watching. Margaret, for all her brilliance, did not seem to see it, or me. She refused to. She looked at Jacob like a man who had stood beside her. When the world demanded a child she could never give, she looked at him with the trust of a woman who had shared her life and her wealth. Sophia noticed something else too. The way Margaret's gaze sometimes lingered on the wooden cradle that sat behind glass in the hallway, untouched, waiting for a child who never came. On those days, Margaret's eyes looked softer, almost broken, as if she carried a weight she couldn't speak of, and when Jacob passed by that cradle, he never looked at it at all. The cracks in the mansion were small at first, easy to ignore, like hairline fractures in glass, but Sophia's careful eyes saw them. She saw how Jacob's laughter never reached his eyes. She saw how Margaret's shoulders stiffened when his voice grew sharp. She saw how the house, for all its wealth and beauty, carried a silence that was not peace, but warning. And on that morning in Lagos, as Sophia placed fresh roses into a crystal vase, she felt the silence shift. It was subtle, almost invisible, like the change in wind before a storm. Something was coming, something dark. She could feel it pressing against the walls, waiting for the moment when someone would finally hear it. Sophia didn't know it yet, but the careful eyes that had once saved her own life were about to save another. The storm broke over Lagos with a sudden roar, lightning cracking against the sky as if the heavens themselves had chosen to strike. The mansion's glass walls reflected the silver streaks, and every thunderclap seemed to rattle the chandeliers hanging above the grand living room. The air felt thick, heavy with secrets. Sophia moved silently through the hallway with a stack of fresh towels, her mind restless though her steps were calm. She had noticed all day that Jacob's voice carried a sharper edge, his calls hushed, his gaze darting too quickly. As she approached Madame Margaret's bedroom, she aired it, Jacob's voice. Not the smooth, charming one he used for guests, but something darker. His words hissed through the crack in the door like poison. Not playful, not lazy, hard. I told you, we're done waiting, he muttered into the phone. She's 48, no child. The whole wealth falls to me when she's gone. Her parents are dead. She's their only heir. Tonight, we'll make it look like stress. We'll say the doctor warned her to rest. The towels nearly slipped from Sophia's hands. Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought the sound might give her away. She froze, body rigid, every instinct screaming at her to run, but something held her still, an iron thread of courage she didn't know she had. The knob of the door turned slightly. Sophia's breath caught. She pressed herself against the wall, clutching the towels like a shield. The door creaked open an inch, Jacob's silhouette shifting as he moved, but then he stopped. He laughed low into the phone, a sound that made Sophia's skin crawl. Don't worry, he said. I'll make it look clean. She won't suffer. I want freedom, a younger wife, a family. This one has given me nothing. Sophia's knees trembled, but she held her ground. Just then, footsteps padded softly behind her. She smelled the gentle perfume before she turned. Madame Margaret, in her blue lace wrapper, reading glasses dangling low, walking toward the door with a folder in hand. Completely unaware, completely unprotected. Sophia moved before she could think. She dropped the towels, pressed her palm firmly over Margaret's mouth, and whispered with urgent eyes, "Don't speak." The billionaire froze, shocked that her maid would dare, but something in Sophia's gaze, wild, bright, unflinching, made her pause. For a breathless second, they stood locked in silence, the storm outside echoing the storm within. Through the thin wood of the door, Jacob's vogue. Ice continued, now low, calculating. "Yes, I have the contact. 1 pill and rest. Natural. No news. Just peace." His tone was steady, almost bored, as if he were planning an evening cocktail instead of murder. Margaret's eyes widened, tears glistening as realization washed over her face like ice water. Her body shook, but Sophia's hand stayed firm, guiding her back slowly, step by step, down the hall. They slipped into the small study, Sophia closing the door without a click, the air inside trembling with their fear. Margaret's hands shook so badly she could barely hold her phone, but she dialed. "Emergency," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please come. My husband. He's planning to harm me." She answered the operator's questions quickly, her eyes locked on Sophia's as though her maid's steady presence was the only thing keeping her from collapsing. The storm outside howled louder, sheets of rain slamming against the windows. Lightning flashed across Margaret's pale face, illuminating the tears that rolled silently down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered to the operator, and ended the call. The silence that followed was unbearable. Then came the sound that turned Sophia's stomach, the slow, measured rhythm of Jacob's footsteps. They echoed down the marble hallway, casual, almost cheerful, a man who believed the night belonged to him. He hummed a tune under his breath as he approached the study, the storm's growl masking his calm menace. Sophia's eyes darted to the window, then back to Margaret, and then, faint but growing, another sound rose above the storm. Sirens. At first distant, then closer, weaving through the wet Lego streets like silver snakes. The handle of the study door turned. Jacob stepped in, smiling, his eyes sweeping the room until they landed on the two women. His wife, pale and trembling, the maid standing in front of her like a wall that refused to move. "What's this?" he asked her. Ked softly, voice silky, dangerous. "A meeting I wasn't invited to?" Sophia's chin lifted, her chest tight with fear, but her voice came steady, quiet and clear. "Ma, stand behind me." And just as Jacob took a step forward, the front gates groaned open with a violent crash. Heavy boots pounded the wet stone, the echo rising through the house. Lightning split the sky above the mansion as the first police officers stormed inside. The night had begun, and none of their lives would be the same again. The study door slammed wide open, hitting the wall with a crack. The thunder outside seemed to echo the sound, rolling over the mansion like a war drum. Jacob froze in place, his confident smirk faltering the instant the police stepped in. Their boots thudded against the marble, uniforms dripping with rain, flashlights cutting through the storm-darkened room. Sophia stood firm in front of Madame Margaret, her body small but unyielding, her eyes locked on the man who only hours earlier had been laughing about his wife's death. "Sir, step away," the lead officer barked, his voice deep and commanding. For a flicker of a moment, Jacob's mask slipped back on. He raised his hands halfway, his smile returning as though this were some misunderstanding he could charm his way out of. "Officers, please," he said smoothly. "There's been a mistake. My wife has been under stress. She isn't well. You know how rumors can twist." Margaret's voice cut through him, sharp and trembling, but steady enough to strike. "Don't lie, Jacob. I heard every word. You planned to kill me." The words hung heavy, louder than the storm, louder than Jacob's faltering excuses. His smile twitched, cracking into something jagged. "Margaret, love, you know I'd never—" "Enough," she snapped, tears running down her face. "Enough of your lies." Sophia could feel the weight of Margaret's trembling hand against her shoulder. The billionaire CEO, always composed, always in control, was now leaning on her maid for strength. Sophia straightened her back and spoke for the first time in the face of Jacob's burning glare. Her voice was quiet, but every syllable carried steel. "You can't charm your way out of this. Not this time." Jacob's eyes narrowed on her, venomous. "You," he hissed, his voice low and sharp. "This is your doing." Sophia didn't flinch. "No, sir. This is yours." The officers moved swiftly, gripping Jacob by the arms. He resisted at first, struggling, his voice rising in frantic denial. "You're making a mistake. She's my wife. She knows I love her. Margaret, tell them." But Margaret only lowered her head, tears slipping past her glasses as she shook with disbelief at the man she had once trusted with her life. The metallic click of handcuffs rang louder than any thunder. Jacob sagged between the officers, his once proud shoulders collapsing under the weight of his own betrayal. They dragged him through the hallway, his shouts echoing against the marble walls. "I'm innocent! I'm being set up! You'll regret this, Margaret!" The storm outside pounded harder, sheets of rain thrashing against the windows. Sophia's chest heaved as if she had been holding her breath for hours. Only when the doors closed behind Jacob and the house grew quiet again did she allow herself to kneel beside Margaret. "Ma, are you all right?" she whispered, her voice breaking with concern. Margaret lowered herself into the study chair as if her body could no longer bear its own weight. She removed her glasses, her hands shaking, her eyes wide with devastation. For a moment, she looked decades older, the strength stripped bare, replaced with something raw and human. "If you hadn't stopped me," she murmured, her voice soft, trembling. "If you hadn't told me to listen." She shook her head, unable to finish. "You saved my life." Sophia swallowed hard, lowering her gaze. Her throat tightened, but she forced the words out, steady and humble. "I only did what was right, Ma." Margaret reached out with trembling fingers, cupping Sophia's face as if the maid were her anchor to the earth. "No," she whispered fiercely. "You did more than that. You gave me the truth." Lightning flared again, flooding the room with white light. Outside, red and blue police lights pulsed against the storm, reflecting on the mansion's glass walls like the world was bearing witness. Inside, the silence between the two women was thick with something unspoken. Trust born in the shadow of betrayal, a bond sealed in fear and courage. The betrayal had been exposed. The mask had shattered. The man who once smiled for the cameras had revealed himself as a coward driven by greed. But even as Jacob was dragged away, Sophia knew this night was not the end. It was only the beginning. The storm outside would pass, but the storm inside the mansion had only just begun. The storm had passed by morning, but its memory lingered in the air. Lagos woke restless, alive with rumors and headlines. Billionaire CEO's husband arrested in murder plot. Newspapers screamed it across their front pages, radios whispered it through static, and by the time the courthouse doors opened, cameras were already flashing like lightning. Inside, the polished wood and marble floors of the courtroom carried a weight heavier than stone. The benches overflowed with journalists, business associates, and curious onlookers. The air buzzed with whispers, the kind that settle like smoke and refuse to clear. When the doors opened at the back, silence fell like a blade. Margaret walked in first, her white lace gown flowing like calm dignity, her glasses low on her nose. But what stunned the crowd was the figure beside her. Sophia. No maid's uniform this time. Add a golden gown that shimmered beneath the courtroom lights. Her hair neatly styled, her shoulders straight. She walked with her head high, though her heart pounded with the weight of so many eyes. For years, she had been invisible in houses like this. Today, she was no longer hidden. Margaret rested a steady hand on Sophia's arm, as if to anchor her. "Remember," she whispered, her voice soft enough for only Sophia to hear. "You are family now. Hold your head high." The judge entered, stern-faced, robe trailing as he took his seat. "Court is in session." His gavel cracked once, silencing the murmur of the crowd. Jacob was led in next, hands cuffed, suit wrinkled, hair wild from a night behind bars. The man who once strutted through luxury halls now looked small, desperate. His eyes scanned the room, darting toward Margaret, then catching on Sophia. His lips curled, his stare blazing with venom and regret. The prosecutor rose, his voice sharp and unyielding. "Your Honor, we present evidence that the defendant, Mr. Jacob Nelson, conspired to take the life of his wife, Madame Margaret Nelson, for the purpose of inheriting her vast estate. We will prove this through testimony and, most importantly, through his own words." The courtroom held its breath. Jacob shifted, his voice breaking through in protest. "Lies, all lies. I love my wife. I would never—" "Silence," the judge snapped. "You will have your turn." The prosecutor signaled, and from the small speakers on the bench, Jacob's voice filled the room. Smooth, calm, deadly clear. "She's 48, no child, her parents are gone. Everything will be mine. We'll make it look like stress. I want freedom. I want a younger wife. This one has given me nothing." Gasps rippled across the benches. A reporter dropped his pen. A woman covered her mouth with her hand. The words were inescapable, undeniable. Jacob's face drained of color. "That was taken directly from a recording during the Poito Lice intervention," the prosecutor continued. "There is no mistake. The voice is his. The intention is clear. This was not stress. This was murder planned in cold blood." Jacob stumbled to his feet, his voice rising in panic. No, it was a joke. You hear me? A foolish joke. I was venting. I didn't mean any of it." His voice cracked, desperate. "Margaret, tell them I could never." Margaret stood slowly, her hands trembling but her spine straight. She looked at him with eyes filled not with love, not even with anger, but with a grief so heavy it silenced the room. "I heard you," she said, her voice low, each word cutting like glass. "Every word. The man I married was gone long ago. What sat beside me was greed in the shape of a husband." Jacob staggered, his knees weak, his mask had shattered. The judge's gavel struck again. "Mr. Jacob Nelson," the judge declared, voice firm, unmoved by Jacob's pleas, "this court finds you guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. You are hereby sentenced to 10 years in prison." The room erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously, flashes burst like fireworks, whispers spread like fire through dry grass. Margaret closed her eyes, tears slipping free, her hand clutching Sophia's for strength. Sophia held steady, her gaze unflinching, her calm presence a pillar in the storm. Jacob's voice cracked as the officers pulled him back. "You'll regret this," he shouted, wild and broken. "Margaret, Sophia, I'll make you regret this." His words echoed down the corridor as the doors slammed shut behind him. Silence settled over the courtroom once more. Margaret sank into her seat, her glasses fogged with tears. She turned to Sophia, gripping her hand. "If you hadn't stopped me, if you hadn't told me to listen." Her voice broke, but she pressed on. "You saved me. You saved everything." Sophia bowed her head, her throat tight, unable to speak. The moment was too heavy, too sacred. Outside, the world was waiting, cameras, questions, flashing lights, hungry for every detail of betrayal and survival. But inside the courtroom, in that quiet moment, the truth was clear. Jacob's shadow had been exposed, and though justice had been served, both women knew this was not an ending. It was the first step into a new life neither of them had expected, one born out of courage, loyalty, and the kind of truth that could never again be silenced. The sun was blazing over Lagos the day the mansion gates opened to the press. Dozens of cameras waited, lenses pointed like weapons, hungry for a glimpse of the woman who had survived her husband's betrayal. Reporters shouted, umbrellas bobbed in the heat, microphones thrust forward as the guards held the crowd at bay. Everyone expected to see Madame Margaret alone, wrapped in her signature lace, face composed, strength unbroken. But when the doors of the mansion swung open, it was not just Margaret. At her side walked Sophia. The world froze. Gone was the plain maid in simple cotton uniforms who scrubbed marble floors before dawn. In her place stood a young woman in a flowing golden gown, her hair gathered neatly, her skin glowing in the morning light. The cameras went wild, flashes exploding as though they had just discovered a hidden queen. Margaret's hand rested firmly on Sophia's arm, not as a gesture of command, but of belonging. From this day, Margaret's voice rang clear, steady as she faced the press. "Sophia is not just my maid, she is my daughter." The words fell heavy, rippling through the crowd like a wave. Gasps, murmurs, shouted questions. Adopted? The billionaire's daughter? The maid? The flash of cameras was relentless, capturing the moment that rewrote Sophia's life forever. Sophia's chest tightened as she bowed her head, overwhelmed. She had spent years hiding in corners, sweeping away evidence of other people's messes, making herself small so the world wouldn't notice her. And now the world was watching, seeing her not as invisible, but as chosen. But Margaret didn't stop there. She turned to Sophia in front of the crowd, her voice soft but strong. You have careful hands, you have careful eyes, and you saved my life when I didn't even see the danger. A daughter is not always born, sometimes she is found, and I have found mine. Tears burned at Sophia's eyes, but she held them back. The press shouted more questions, cameras popped, but in her heart, only one truth rang. She was no longer alone. Margaret kept her promise. Weeks later, Sophia sat in a small hall, a crisp white blouse tucked into a navy skirt, books clutched tight to her chest. Students bustled around her, laughter echoing, papers shuffling, the campus alive with energy. She felt their eyes on her. Some whispered, "That's her, the girl Margaret adopted." Others only stared, but Sophia lifted her chin, Margaret's words echoing in her mind. Hold your head high, you belong here. University life was not easy. She faced prejudice, whispers that she had bought her way in, mutters that she was just a maid in disguise. But Sophia did not waste her energy on bitterness. She poured herself into her studies, reading late into the night until her eyes blurred, memorizing every line, solving every problem, proving herself not just to them, but to herself. And slowly, the whispers changed. Professors began to notice her sharp answers. Classmates began to ask for her help. Her name appeared at the top of exam lists. 4 years later, she walked across the graduation stage, cap and gown crisp, her heart thundering as the hall erupted in applause. In the front row, Margaret sat with tears streaming down her face, clapping as though the sound of her palms alone could lift Sophia higher. When Sophia received her award as the best student in her department, Margaret stood, clapping louder than anyone, pride shining through her tears. The world saw it. The maid who once moved like a shadow had become a scholar, a woman of grace and strength. When she stepped into Margaret's company as an account officer, it felt like destiny had been rewritten. She no longer carried trays or polished glass tables. She carried files, balanced books, and spoke with authority in boardrooms filled with men who once would have ignored her. Her quiet strength, the same that saved Margaret that stormy night, now guided the company's finances. Board members who once barely noticed her now leaned in when she spoke. But even as Sophia found her footing in this new world, Margaret never let her forget where she had come from or how far she had climbed. You were careful when the world was careless, Margaret told her one night over tea in the study. And that is why you will never fall. This company, this home, this family, it is yours too. Sophia lowered her eyes, her throat tight with emotion. She had scrubbed these marble floors once, dreaming only of survival. Now she stood on them as an equal, not by accident, not by charity, but by courage. The golden transformation was not just in gowns or titles, it was in the way Sophia carried herself, the way the world looked at her now, not as a maid, but as a daughter, a scholar, and a woman who had earned her place in the light. But beneath all the celebration, Margaret's eyes still carried shadows. She had survived betrayal, won justice, and given Sophia a future. But in the quiet hours of the night, she often lingered by the glass cabinet in the hallway. She still looked at the empty cradle, and sometimes her hands trembled when she touched it. Sophia noticed. She always noticed. The cracks in the house had been sealed but not healed, and soon, Margaret would face a choice that would test her heart more than any courtroom ever had. The years after the trial seemed to bring peace, yet peace for Margaret was never complete. She walked the halls of her mansion with her shoulders straighter than ever, ran her company with more determination, and smiled with pride each time Sophia entered a boardroom or came home from work. Yet behind her glasses, in those quiet moments when no one was watching, her eyes drifted often to the cradle locked away in glass, and to the silence Jacob had left behind. Sophia noticed it. She always did. She would find Margaret late at night in the study, tea untouched, a file of papers open, but her mind far away. Sometimes her lips pressed tight as though she were swallowing words she would never say. Sometimes her hands trembled just slightly, betraying the storm still alive inside her. One afternoon, the sun slanted gently through the mango trees in the garden. Sophia sat with Margaret at the round iron table, their teacups steaming, the air heavy with the scent of blossoms. Margaret adjusted her glasses and looked at Sophia with a gravity that made her heart sink. My child, she said softly, forgiveness is not about them deserving it. It is about freeing ourselves. Sophia frowned, unsure where her mother's words were leading. Ma, she whispered, what are you saying? I've carried the weight of Jacob's betrayal long enough, Margaret replied, her voice low but steady. Tomorrow, I will see him. The words fell like stones into Sophia's chest. She set down her cup with trembling fingers. Ma, after everything he planned to do to you, after all his lies? Why? Margaret gave a faint, sorrowful smile. Because strength is not only in punishing, it is also in letting go. The next morning, the iron gates of Kirikiri prison clanged open with a sound that made Sophia's skin prickle. She walked beside Margaret, the heavy echo of their footsteps filling the cold corridor. Guards led them past rows of cells, until they stopped before a steel door. It opened with a groan, and there he was, Jacob. 2 years had stripped him of the man he once was. His shoulders sagged, his once black hair streaked gray, his eyes hollow. The proud suits and polished shoes were gone, replaced with the plain uniform of a prisoner. The moment his gaze met Margaret's, his knees buckled. He fell, trembling, to the floor. I don't deserve to see you, he whispered, his voice breaking, tears spilling freely. I was blind, greedy, foolish, yet here you stand. Margaret's face remained composed, but her voice carried the weight of every wound. Jacob, you tried to destroy me. You betrayed a woman who gave you everything. But I refuse to live in chains of anger. I am withdrawing the case. You will be released, but our marriage ends today. From her bag, she drew out divorce papers and laid them before him. His hands shook as he reached for them, eyes wide, unable to believe. You forgive me? After all I did? Margaret's eyes glistened, but her voice was firm. Yes, but never again as husband and wife. And then, as if mercy itself wasn't enough, she pulled out a second document, an account transfer of $1 million. She set it gently on the table between them. Start your life again. Use it well. Make this your second chance. Jacob collapsed, sobs tearing through him. He clutched the papers to his chest, his cries filling the cold prison room. I don't deserve this kindness, he said, broken. Margaret turned away, her hand trembling as she adjusted her glasses. Sophia stepped quickly to her side, her heart a storm of confusion and awe. As they walked out, she whispered, Ma, how could you give him that much after all he did? Margaret's voice was soft, almost weary, yet filled with quiet power. Because mercy is not for the guilty alone. Mercy is for the one who gives it. The iron gates shut behind them with a final clang, but in Margaret's heart, a door long closed seemed to open. For the first time in years, her shoulders eased, the burden was lighter. Sophia looked at her with new eyes. She had once saved Margaret's life with careful hands and careful eyes. But now Margaret was teaching her something greater. That true strength was not only in survival, but in choosing peace when revenge was easier. The world outside continued as if nothing had changed, but inside both women, something had shifted forever. And yet, Sophia could not shake the question. What would Jacob do with such mercy? Would he waste it or transform it? The answer would come years later, in a way none of them expected. The years after the prison visit unfolded like the pages of a new book, so different from the storm that had once threatened to consume their lives. Sophia, no longer hidden in the shadows of service, stepped into the world as a woman seen, respected, and loved. The mansion that once echoed with betrayal now hummed with laughter and gentle light. It was during this season of calm that Sophia met Johnson. He was tall, kind-eyed, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who didn't need to prove anything. They met at a business conference where Margaret's company was presenting new fabric lines. Johnson represented another firm, and their first conversation was about numbers and strategy. But beneath the figures and polite smiles, something deeper sparked. His questions were thoughtful, his laughter genuine, and when his eyes lingered on Sophia, it was not with the curiosity of someone who recognized her from headlines, but with a warmth that made her heart stumble. Their talk stretched from business to books, from schedules to stolen moments under moonlit skies. For Sophia, it was new territory. This feeling of being seen not for her past, not for the scandal that once defined her, but simply for herself. Johnson never looked at her as the maid who became a daughter. He saw her as a woman, brave, intelligent, kind. When he proposed, it was not in a grand hall or before cameras, but under the quiet shade of a jacaranda tree, where purple blossoms fell softly around them. Sophia, he said, his voice trembling slightly, you've known storms and you've walked through fire, but I want to be the calm after, the roof that never leaks, the arms that never let go. Will you marry me? Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, yes. The wedding was a celebration unlike any Lagos had seen in years. Margaret spared no expense, determined to give her daughter the kind of day that erased every shadow of her past. The hall glittered with crystal chandeliers, the tables draped in Margaret's finest lace designs. Guests gasped as Sophia walked down the aisle in her flowing white gown, radiant, her smile brighter than any diamond in the room. At the front row, Margaret stood, tears streaming freely, her pride visible in every clap of her hands. She had once called Sophia a daughter found, and now, watching her walk toward love, she knew those words had never been truer. The applause thundered as vows were exchanged, and when Johnson slipped the ring on Sophia's finger, the past seemed to melt away. She was no longer the orphan with empty hands, no longer the maid who moved silently in the shadows of marble halls. She was a wife, a partner, a woman who had rewritten her story. Months later, joy deepened further. Sophia held a tiny bundle in her arms, her newborn daughter, Amara Grace. Her heart swelled as she looked down at the little face. The small fists curled tightly, the fragile breaths that carried all the weight of new beginnings. When Margaret took the baby into her arms, she broke down completely. Tears ran freely as she kissed Amara's forehead, her hands trembling as she whispered, "This is the dream I thought would never come true." For years she had stared at an empty cradle, her heart aching for the child she could never have. Now, through Sophia, that ache was soothed. The cradle was no longer a symbol of loss, but of promise fulfilled in a way she had never expected. The mansion that once held secrets and storms now echoed with laughter, the soft cries of a newborn, and the warmth of a family that had been rebuilt from ashes. But even as they celebrated, a quiet question remained, unspoken, lingering in the air like a shadow that hadn't completely disappeared. Margaret had given Jacob mercy. She had given him freedom and even the chance to begin again. What had he done with it? Neither Sophia nor Margaret spoke of it often, but in the silent hours of the night, both women wondered, would mercy prove to be wasted? Or had Jacob too found a way to change? The answer they would soon discover was closer than they imagined. The years rolled on, and peace became their daily rhythm. The mansion was no longer heavy with silence, but alive with voices. Sophia's laughter echoing down the hallways, Johnson's calm presence, little Amara's cries and giggles filling every corner. Margaret walked lighter now, her shoulders less burdened, her smile warmer. For the first time in decades, the house felt like a home. But one quiet morning, as sunlight streamed through lace curtains and birds called across the garden, a letter arrived. Its envelope was plain, the handwriting shaky. Margaret opened it slowly, her breath catching the moment she saw the name at the bottom. Jacob Nelson. Her fingers trembled as she read. The words were short, humble, stripped of all the pride that once defined him. I have nothing to ask. Only one truth to share before my time runs out. If you can find it in your heart, come. Sophia found Margaret hours later sitting in the study, glasses low on her nose, the letter folded neatly beside her. Ma, Sophia whispered, a flicker of unease in her chest. What is it? Margaret looked up, her eyes glistening with the weight of old memories. It's Jacob, she said quietly. He wants to see me. Sophia's heart tightened. Ma, you don't owe him anything. No, Margaret agreed softly, but sometimes the truth isn't for them, it's for us. The next day they went together. The years had taken more from Jacob than prison ever could. He was thinner, his hair fully gray, his hands trembling as he stood in the modest office of the orphanage he had built. Yes, an orphanage. The walls were painted bright, laughter of children spilled through the open windows, and the sight of tiny shoes lying neatly by the door filled Sophia with disbelief. When Jacob turned to face them, his eyes filled instantly with tears. He sank to his knees, his voice breaking. Your mercy saved me, he said hoarsely. I didn't waste the chance you gave. I could not undo the evil I planned, but I could build something good with what you left me. Margaret stood frozen, her heart torn between memory and the scene before her. Jacob's voice shook as he continued. Every naira went into this place. These children, they are like Sophia once was, alone, unseen. I wanted to give them a home, so that one day they could walk into the world as she did, with dignity. Sophia's breath caught. She stepped forward, looking through the open door where children ran across the courtyard, their laughter bright against the weight of his confession. Her own past came flooding back. The nights on hard benches, the hunger, the ache of being invisible. And now, here was an echo of her life transformed into hope for others. Jacob's tears fell freely. "I don't deserve forgiveness, Margaret. I don't deserve even to speak your name. But I needed you to know, I tried. I truly tried." Margaret's lips trembled as she looked down at the man who had once plotted her death, the same man who had broken her heart and nearly stolen her life. And yet here he was, humbled, surrounded by children who carried a second chance he had never earned. Slowly she knelt. Her hand shook as she placed it gently on his shoulder. "You took mercy and turned it into mercy for others. That is enough." Sophia felt her throat tighten, her vision blur as emotion surged within her. She looked at the children, their laughter carrying through the halls of the orphanage, and realized something deep. Her story had not only saved Margaret, but it had saved Jacob too. It had rippled outward into lives of children who might never know her name, but who would live because of her courage and Margaret's mercy. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of fire, Margaret, Sophia, Johnson, and little Amara walked hand in hand through the orphanage courtyard. Children ran up to greet them, clinging to Sophia's gown, tugging at her hands. Amara giggled in her mother's arms, reaching out as though she already understood she was among family. Margaret whispered as she watched them, her voice thick with tears. "This is the legacy I never imagined, but always longed for. Not built in boardrooms or fortunes, but in lives changed." Sophia smiled through her tears, her heart swelling with a peace she had never known. She was no longer the maid with careful eyes, no longer the orphan with empty hands. She was a daughter, a wife, a mother, and now, in ways she could never have foreseen, a savior of many. The storm that once nearly destroyed them had given way to a new dawn, and as the last rays of light bathed the orphanage, it felt as though destiny itself had bowed to mercy and written a story no one could have predicted. The story of a maid who whispered, "Don't speak," and in doing so, saved a billionaire, redeemed a betrayer, and gave hope to generations yet unborn.